All right, welcome, Unsecurity Podcast listeners. This is episode 159 of the Unsecurity Podcast. The date is Friday, December 17th. You'll be hearing this sometime next week. I'm excited for this show. Joining me, as usual, is Mr. Brad Nye. Brad, you want to say hi?
Yep, good. Oh, and there goes Evan. He's down in Mexico today. So we'll see how this goes. How's it going, Evan? Are you still there?
I think I'm still here.
Okay, you're still there. Your video
Yeah.
dropped on our end, so
Well, you don't want to see
okay,
this face anyway, man, so that's okay.
there you go. That's a good start to the show. So today we have Mike Pinky Thompson with us, IR team lead, right? So
Yep.
welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So, our listeners may or may not have heard, but there's something that's going on. Uh, Internet's burning down. I'm not sure. So Log4j. And I know our IR team has done a ton of work and research, so that's why we brought Pinky on. So, I guess, let's start with what is it? Can you explain to people what we're dealing with?
Yeah. And the internet burning down is a pretty good way to put it. I know. I mean, you guys know me. I'm not really a merchant of fear, but this is one where it may actually be warranted. Uh, so the Log4j itself is a programming library, Java based. It's built into a lot of Java applications, which we'll talk about a little bit more here in a minute. That's kind of why it's a problem. Essentially, what we're looking at, though, is there was a vulnerability that was found in the way that particular library handles requests. And so it's a really simple exploit. So, obscenely simple, really.
Mm-hmm.
Our code to test for it is basically the exploit, that we've sent out to folks, just a benign one. But it's as simple as crafting a URL and dropping it in any input field on a vulnerable web app, or a vulnerable application. It doesn't have to be a web app, or even as simple as changing your browser fingerprint, which is a little advanced for a lot of folks. But I mean, I know for like our folks, it's pretty trivial. And so your browser fingerprint is like, if you visit a website, it gets logged in as, I'm using Google Chrome version whatever. So you can actually change that through a pretty simple command, visit a website, and you'll attack the system right there with just that one line, and compromised immediately.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a bad one. Kind of some notes on sort of how does this happen, right? So at the moment we're looking at estimates are around 3 billion vulnerable devices. That's just a few. A lot of those have been patched at this point. That's not always sufficient. We could talk a little more about that in a minute too. But here's the thing, right? I don't want to offend any programmers out there. I used to RB one kind of, and I have plenty of programmer friends, but it's pretty common to grab a library, drop it in your code if it's well tested, well known,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what Log4j is. It's been around 20 years. People trust it. So
Yeah, and that's I think what makes it a little tricky is a lot of programmers like they say, well, we don't use Log4j. Well, yeah, but it's in one of the other libraries that you use. It's 3 libraries deep, so that's how you get to that whatever 3 billion impacted. It's going to take a long time to get all that patched.
yeah, and so that's kind of the thing, right? So there has been a patch released. There was an initial patch 2.15 for the library that was supposed to fix it and did not. So then a second patch was released 2.16, and where this is tricky is that most folks don't know they have this in their environment. They have no real clue that it's there, and even if it is, they can't patch it with that patch. They're going to have to rely on a vendor patch.
Mm-hmm.
So I know there was a good slate of vendor patches came out late last week and early this week, and they're probably going to have to do that again now that there's a newer version of the patch.
What's crazy is I think I saw that version 2.0 and below was not impacted.
Sort of.
Or
So
below 2.
that's yeah. It's so technically all of the version one libraries were supposed to be non-impacted, but you actually could have configured a version 1 to use this particular request format and be vulnerable. So it's not a guarantee if you don't have it.
Wow. So basically, huge footprint, super easy to exploit. Good luck.
So what's the potential impact?
I put one word in my notes for this, which is huge. So on top of being really easy to exploit, it's exceptionally powerful. I mean, just the power is extraordinary. So with that crafted payload, right? And I mean, we're not talking about anything super complicated here, right? Literally JNDI colon LDAP or one of the other 5 or 6 that it can use, and then you put your payload after that. And that payload can be go download a beacon, run that beacon, create a scheduled task to run it later. Anything you can do from a command prompt, from PowerShell, from a Linux terminal, you can build it into that request. So the real impact here is going to be in those post-exploit activities, right? So, we've been talking about it. Realistically, if you've got a vulnerable device that's on the internet, if it's externally available, you should consider that compromised at this point. Even if you've patched, right? So you likely patched a day or 2 after this came out. It's probably been compromised ahead of time. And the real concern here is what happens after. So it's easy to exploit. What are they leaving behind? What persistence mechanisms are staying behind? That kind of thing. And that's where, at least for us, that's where it's pretty scary. We don't, to be honest with you, we don't know yet. I was searching earlier. I see no post-exploit IOCs that people have right now. It's kind of quiet.
That's scary because you can't. What do you look for?
Right. And so, even deeper on this, if you want to go a little farther, so Log4j is a logging mechanism. It's probably not generating its own logs. So those requests may come in. You may get compromised and have no way to actually see it at the moment.
That's crazy.
Well, I've seen because it's like they're there, but you don't know where, and you don't know what they're planning to do.
Yeah, exactly. And we've there are some of the activities have been cryptocurrency miners, right? Like that's a common thing that we see now. I'm less worried about those. You're going to find those. You're going to see high CPU utilization. You're going to see something. Those are going to get found out. Those aren't the guys I'm worried about. I'm worried about the ones that are really quiet right now. That like you probably got compromised, but nothing's happened. So, what's next?
How many times do we see that, right? I mean, even you guys earlier, when was that? This month with Hafnium?
Yeah, last few weeks. Yeah. So, if you guys remember the Hafnium, also known as Proxy Logon and now Proxy Shell in Exchange, earlier this year. So this was around March that happened, and it's a very similar attack. It was a reasonably simple to do. It was a little more complicated than this, but the idea was you would compromise an Exchange server, leave behind a web shell, and so a web shell's basically a command prompt that you can access from the internet. And so everybody patched because the news got out about this. Everybody patched. Everybody kept patching. The first patch didn't work. We kept patching, and people thought they were safe. But what happened was they got compromised prior to the patches. And so in the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've had kind of a rash of cases where people said, I was fully patched. How does this happen? And now they're getting ransomed or something else from that. And I see this taking a similar path, and Oscar and I were talking about it in the spring, and we were just like, "Hey, I bet we see this crop back up in about 6 months." Turns off, we were off by about 2 months, so we're seeing it now.
Not surprising though, the timing coming into December. I mean, Evan, you and I talked about that the last 2 weeks. People are distracted. The holidays. This is the perfect time to hit because it's going to cause the most damage. It's going to be the most disruptive.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, and there's that tendency to take a shortcut, right? I mean, to apply the patch. Okay, well, we must be okay, and then go back to your, normal routine, as opposed to, maybe it's on this particular server. Maybe I should increase logging on, just about everything. Really, take a look at all the processes that are actually running and executing on this machine, and look for something that's unusual, right?
Yeah.
That would be
turn on PowerShell logging.
There you go. And that would be a more, I think, prudent approach. But this time of year, right, I want to get back to my family. I want to get back to my Christmas shopping. So I applied the patch. All right, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'll check it out later. And then you forget, never get to it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, tell us a little bit about how you guys on the IR team like stay up to date, research. What's the process that you guys follow?
Google, yeah, just Google. But yeah, so there. I mean, honestly, that's a lot of it, right? There's a lot of good open source information out here about this, right? We saw this come through. One of our guys, Kyle, he really caught on to it Friday. I know Kyle's been mentioned on here before. I recently found out that apparently there's at least one listener who is really interested in Kyle's story. So just want to let them know that Kyle's doing great. He's really progressing, and he's an awesome member of the team. So, yeah. So Kyle did some really good work late last week to pull together some artifacts and some information for us. And then over the weekend, he and I and Oscar and some other folks, we kind of dug in, right? And so we stood up a honeypot to try to get some post-exploit activity to try to figure out what's going on there. So far, we've kind of coming up empty on that. Whether that's because we can't see what's happening or not, we're not sure. But yeah, there are some really good. Our friends over at Huntress have put together some really good tools there. There's a good test tool. They're actually running a thread on Reddit as well. If you dig in there, I mean, obviously it's Reddit, so verify anything you see there. But I think if it's from Huntress, you're probably okay. We like those guys. And yeah, just really digging in on this. You know, we're talking to a lot of folks. Did some calls this morning, talking to people who were worried about it, and just kind of trying to feel out what's going on out there. And like I said, so far we've seen a couple of post-exploit things that came in from some clients that we work with. I was able to pull down a couple files from our attackers from their web servers. Got some hashes on those. Analyzed them, did some things like that. Those look like they were part of a Joker command and control framework. So also got tagged as Mirai, which is a pretty rowdy botnet. So I'm not sure if that's just a generic thing that they did because it kind of looked like that activity. But yeah, we're just digging hard. We're trying to find anybody that has been exploited, anything we can dig into, and try to get those post exploit IOCs out there.
Yeah, I think you're right. The scary part is there's no visibility at this point. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, absolutely, and it could be anything, right? I mean, like you can use this to open the calculator on someone's machine. You can use this to install a beacon. You can. One of the ones I looked at was a Linux command for wget, which is go download a file. That file was a shell script, which then downloaded 3 more files, and it set them all chmod plus x to set those to executable, and then it executed them all in one line. I mean, it's crazy how powerful this is.
Wow. So
I saw another piece of guidance too. I think in what came from Team Ambush was if you have a backup, maybe a couple of weeks ago, maybe restore from that backup, patch it, and then put it online. It's a hell of a lot of work, but I think it's a better. It's still not a guarantee you're not already compromised either. It's just a better. Less of a chance maybe that you're compromised.
Yeah, I'd feel better doing that than, if possible, right? It's not going to be possible on a lot of these systems.
Well, and if you
I will add one thing
from the beginning, because one of the things that's always frustrated me, I've always been a network guy, so you configure a firewall, ingress and egress, right? So if my firewall was actually configured correctly for a critical server where it's only communicating with the things that it needs to communicate with, and let's say it did get compromised, I would see that outbound on my block list because it wouldn't be allowed to. It'd be going to command and control that isn't permitted. So, I mean, following those best practices from the very beginning of configuring things the way they're supposed to be configured would really go a long ways towards protecting you.
Oh, absolutely. Man, we preach a lot of fundamentals around here, and I mean, that's huge, right? I mean, we joked a while back about getting some shirts that just say default deny across the front of them and just wearing those all the time because that's what you should be doing. I will add one thing to that. If you're going to restore, just from a forensic guy standpoint, try to preserve a copy of the potentially compromised system in case you need to dig into that, find some IOCs, and try to figure out what, if they moved laterally, what they did after that. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a ton of work, but that ransom hit, on Christmas Eve or, if we wait a few months on Easter or something like that, it's going to be a real problem for you. It's going to be a lot more work.
Yeah. So I mentioned the PowerShell logging. Can you, for the listeners, explain why we would want to do that? What are these attackers? What is their method of using that?
Yeah. And so PowerShell Plus, I mean, if it's a Linux system, right, make sure you're getting all your bash logging and that kind of stuff. But any sort of command line logging, you think about the way this attack works. It's going to be that line of code running a command line argument of some sorts, whatever that is. This isn't a GUI attack necessarily. It can certainly progress to one with some C2 and things like that, but at the moment it's going to be a command line argument. So when you're talking about PowerShell logging, and this is good practice beyond this exploit, obviously, but that helps us as investigators, or you if you're investigating, to see what the attacker was doing, right? So I see that they ran a PowerShell command to go drop a piece of malware on this server elsewhere and run later, or they set up a scheduled task, or downloaded a beacon installed service, that kind of thing, right? And so that PowerShell login is going to be, or any command line logging is going to be really critical to figure out what these attackers did post exploit in this instance. So
Well,
yeah, turn it up
yeah,
right now.
yeah. Well, and the other thing is you can set it through group policy to go to a network share.
Mm-hmm.
Monitor that share. If there's a new file created in there, see what's going on. Right?
Yeah, you'll know that there was some PowerShell activity that maybe you weren't expecting. Now, that said, there are a lot of things that use PowerShell, and you may get some, but man, it's worth weeding through those false positives to have those artifacts to know what really happened.
Yeah. Oh, and the other plus, like you said, is you realize there's an issue, call the IR team. Well, it's going to be a couple hours, 4 or 5 hours to typically at least get started deploying agents.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just have to wait and hope they run it again so you can see what they did. Right?
Yeah, and I mean,
knowing.
Exactly. I mean, pat ourselves on the back a little bit. I think we deploy a lot faster than most. I mean, a lot of times we've had incidents where they were calling another company and us, and we're spun up and almost done with our investigation by the time they get started, kind of thing. And I'll pat the guys on the back for that. We're pretty good, but even still, though, that's a huge amount of time. 4 hours or so to get spun up, and realistically, it's kind of the dirty little secret of incident response and digital forensics is like, if you're not logging artifacts, there's no way for us to go back and look at these artifacts. It's going to be tough to tell what happened. There's a lot of deep things we can pull out, MFT analysis and, registry hives and things like that we can do. But you can save yourself a lot of time and a lot of headache just by having good logging. It's a lot quicker to track that down.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I would say the delay is typically on the client side, right? Because it's easy for us to get ready to go. They have to deploy this out. Yep. What was I going to say? Shoot, I lost my train of thought.
Well, you mentioned good logging. What's a good place? Let's say that somebody's listening right now and they're like, "Gosh, am I logging right?" Where's a good place we can send them to say, "Set up your logging this way on a Windows server, an Active Directory server, or a Linux box"? Do we have any write up ourselves, or can we point people somewhere?
I'm trying to think. I'm actually not sure if we do.
I know.
Do you have anything, Brent?
CIS has those hardening standards. Microsoft has some that do go into that. Although it blows my mind that PowerShell logging is not enabled by default because it's tiny, right? Most people are not going to be running it, so it's not going to eat up a bunch of space. But anyway.
Yeah, it's tough because it's going to be per product, right? So every Windows is going to have one standard, Linux is going to have another. Every piece of software on Linux, you can have all the Windows logs that you want, but Exchange server needs to be set up to log a certain way, and Active Directory logs need to be configured a certain way. So it gets tough given that broad, given the broad nature of that. But yeah, anything out there. I'm not sure if we have an article on it or not. To be honest with you, we may have. It seems like we've been requested to type one, but just in general, right?
Even just like a base Windows server OS logging, right? And then if you add Exchange or add others, then build that stuff later. Because one of the things I don't like about CIS is it's not just logging I'm going to get with those configurations. It's a whole bunch of other stuff that I sort of it's a pain in the ass to do those sometimes because I have to do them in a test environment. And I always have to deviate from those, right? Because I can never just take it as the template. But
Yeah.
I think
I guess
even putting on PowerShell logging, I mean, what are the steps for that?
Yeah, it's a group policy. You turn it on, and then you kind of got to pick between was it transcription logging and the other one. There's a couple there. Um,
yeah,
I I think transcription is your highest, and you're going to want to set it to transcription so that you get every single command. Windows does by sort of default log some script. PowerShell script logging is there, and like there's a PowerShell event log that's out there. But it can be insufficient. We use it a lot. We tend to find a lot of good stuff there, but really it's just a group policy. Turn it on. It's going to be in those settings there for that.
yeah,
Administrative templates, I think, in group policy.
yeah. To give you an idea of how easy it is, I was talking with a group, affinity group, whatever. It's like 20 different organizations, and I was mentioning, they're like, what can we do that makes is easy? And I told them, and before I even finished the explanation, one of the guys goes, "Yeah, it's on. I'm good. I tested it."
Yeah.
I mean, it really is simple to do.
Yeah, I think there's a TechNet article or something that runs you through the process. But
Mandiant has a fantastic one.
Yep.
From 2016, which is,
Yep.
I mean, this is not new.
No, it's not. No.
Next, another thing
And retain those for a while.
we always turned on too is DHCP logging.
Mm-hmm.
DHCP logging and DNS logging
That's
is really
good.
helpful too. And all of these can be turned on through group policy, unless I'm mistaken. It's Brad knows it's been a while since I've been a sysadmin, but that doesn't change a whole lot. DNS logging is really important because if you're talking about C2 beacons, command and control beacons, a lot of those operate across DNS.
Mm-hmm.
That way it doesn't get flagged
Well-
by your firewall. Your firewall is always going to pass DNS.
Right. Well, that's a good thing to talk about is, why are your endpoints reaching out to the internet for DNS? Funnel it all through a central DNS and only allow DNS traffic from that device. Then if you start seeing pings in your logs from others, well, maybe I want to investigate that.
Yep. Yeah, and it's tough because DNS is really noisy, right? But yeah, absolutely. That should all be going through your internal servers and then letting them forward it out.
Yeah. Well, and if you set it up properly, it wouldn't be noisy in terms of hits from, non-approved devices.
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. No, I see what you're getting at. Yeah. So on that next layer, the out
Yeah,
your
yeah.
perimeter, have that one set up. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great call.
I mean, it's simple things that we can do to really minimize the impact, and that's really all we can do, right? What can we do because we've talked about it. We can't prevent it all the time. It's going to happen. This is a great example.
Yeah, there's always going to be another 0 day, right? There's always going to be something we don't know about. There's going to be something going on. I mean, realistically, most of the beacons and things that we see out there are, they're unknown. We've talked about this before, but hash-based detection it's not useless. It's something, but if I go change the IP of my C2 server in there, that changes that hash completely. It's not going to get detected. And so we used to make a big deal out of finding firsts. If we found a first piece of malware that hadn't been seen before, it was kind of a big deal. But then we started to realize they're all firsts at this point. Everything's new.
Yeah.
Every time we pull down a file, it's rarely been seen before.
Yeah. I mean, and it's as simple as adding a line to the first piece of it, right? Just even if it's a commented out line, that's it. Totally change it.
It's a mathematical computation of everything in that file, and one tiny little change, and that it throws off the entire hash. So,
Nuts.
Yep.
Wow. So I'm trying to think what else. I'm
Well,
looking
one
at
of the basics that we've always taught, and I, I'm an old timer, man. I'm too old. But one of the best things for a security person is an intimate knowledge of the environment I manage, right? I understand how it works. I understand, traffic patterns. I know data flows. I know baselines. I know when I see deviations that there's always a reason for it. Computers only do what they've been told to do. Something somewhere told it to do what it's doing, right? So if you see something unusual, so if you've established a baseline, let's say on network traffic, right? Just say bandwidth, right? And I see that, this is the baseline, and then there's a spike. Don't just blow it off. There's a reason why that spike happened. Why did that spike happen? Track it down. And like, Pinky's saying, you're going to need logs to do that, right? You're going to need evidence. You can't just, because that's another thing we see, I think, over and over again in incident response that's a flaw is you make assumptions, right? You saw this and you saw this over here, so you're going to assume that these things happened in between because you don't have evidence. That's what you have to do. But if you have evidence, you might find that it went all kinds of different places before it got to this place over here. So logging is absolutely critical. And if you ever, my advice is if you aren't sure, log it. Should I turn on this setting? Sure, do it. Turn it all on. And then what people usually say, well, but I can't, my SIM solution can't handle that much data or whatever. So what? Keep the log data anyway, process what you can, and preserve those logs, right? Get those things off the network on a regular basis so you can restore them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how many times do we pop into an incident response and the logs are gone because the attackers know where the logs are and they deleted them? We see it all the time.
Or the company left the default 20 meg limit and they're overwritten.
Yeah, that's every day. I mean, I'm always surprised when we find one that's not set that way. And I'm always super pumped when I find that out, and I generally call that out and let our clients know, hey, I really appreciate you doing this. Good job.
I just don't get it because, you've worked with me. That was one of the first things I did when we set up a new server was at least 200 meg.
Yep.
Just, poof. That was a dark build. I don't. Anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, and just kind of, to borrow from Sands to kind of sum up a lot of that too, right? Like Evans mentioned there about the baselines, know normal and find evil, right? If you know what's normal, you're going to see the evil pretty quickly. And that's the way to go.
I think that's a good segue. I was going to ask you about threat hunting and what does that look like? What does that entail? Because we hear that a lot, and I don't know if everybody knows exactly what that means.
Yeah, so threat hunts can take some different forms, right? Sometimes it's and actually this is a really good practice. Sometimes you're just digging around in your environment to see what shows up, right? You're using those baselines, finding the anomalies, and then working from there. In an instance like Log4j, if we're talking about threat hunting, we want to start at the point of the vulnerable device, right? Like I said earlier, we have to assume at this point those have been compromised. Like we can't do anything but assume that. Attackers all over the internet are just blasting out exploits right now. It's kind of I saw somebody noted it's a land grab. So right now let's scoop up all the land, drop our persistence, put our feet down. And one of the scarier things I've seen is that there's some talk of maybe attackers patching the vulnerability for you, right? So they drop their persistence for later, patch it so no one else can get in. And we saw that with the NetScaler, the Citrix ADC NetScaler back in early 2020. We saw that happen there. So a little bit of a concern there. But so a lot of unknowns. But in this particular instance, right, we're going to start with that vulnerable device. We're going to start with that device. We're going to assume that it was compromised. And then we're going to get on there and we're going to try to find anything that's been altered in the last bit. Try to find some indicator of compromise. Find some piece of something that the attacker did, right? Did they drop a file? Did they run a command? And then work out from there, right? So that's our indicator of compromise. If it's a file and we know it's a command and control framework, then we know we need to look around that device, right? Let's look for lateral movement. What can that device touch? If you're in a proper DMZ, probably not a whole lot, but we know that's not always the case. And so we're going to want to start working out from that. And really with a threat hunt is, if you've got a targeted threat hunt, it's that you have some sort of an IOC, some sort of indicator of compromise, something you're working off of. That could be as simple as a command that you saw run, right? Set up this, right? One of our guys saw Windows Remote Management get turned on in one of our cases. And that's not normal behavior. So if you see that, that's something to work off of. Okay, so now where did that all get turned on? And, that's a really simplified explanation of it because there's a lot involved with that. We're pulling a lot of logs down and digging around, but it's essentially just taking a piece of known evil or a piece of potential evil and just digging around to see what we can find, see what happened.
So kind of wrapping up, I think the takeaway for people is get patched. Don't assume that because you patched, you're safe.
Yep. Know
Know your systems, and like you said, start looking for these anomalies. Don't take it lightly. You mentioned that, and it just dawned on me. Hey, go look and see what version of Log4j you're using. Right? If it's the latest patch and you didn't patch it, well, there you go. right? That could
Yeah.
be potentially an indicator.
There were some manual workarounds too, some manual mitigations that could be put in place, and if you look for those, see if those have been altered. If they have, there's an actual indicator of compromise. If you
Yeah.
didn't do it, it tells me an attacker did it. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Brad. Like I said, assume these devices are compromised. Just work off of that assumption and go from there. And if something's not giving you the warm and fuzzies, investigate or reach out to someone who can help investigate it.
Yeah, and if I was, a CISO, if I was, running my team, we'd have a series of meetings just to brainstorm, what if scenarios. What if, what
Mm-hmm.
if we see this? What if we see that? What kind of coverage are we going to have, and how are we going to respond to it? Because what we don't want to do is just go about our day, forget that this ever happened, and then get caught by surprise sometime later down the road. And it doesn't have to be a formal sort of, incident response exercise, but we can just do some brainstorming and talk through some what ifs, give everybody an opportunity to give input, give me a scenario, because they have different perspectives too. And that's one of the things that's always been a challenge with who we're trying to protect ourselves against is they have different perspectives. They wouldn't attack the same way I would every time,
Mm-hmm.
So getting different perspectives from different people, and then just be prepared. Because if it did get compromised and they are just resting on the server somewhere, maintaining persistence, shit's going to, excuse my language, it's going to hit the fan
Yeah.
eventually.
Yep. Yeah, and Evan, I think you touched on something really big there that I like to point out to people, and I love that thought process is you've got to put yourself in the attacker's shoes as well. Like, I hate to tell people to kind of get in that evil mindset. I have to do it sometimes, and I don't like it. It's a dark place. I'm a good guy. I don't like going down those paths. But I got to think like an attacker. What would an attacker do? Would they just throw a crypto miner on there, or would they sit back and wait, like you were saying? Wait for the maximum impact. Wait for Christmas Eve. Wait for, whatever you've got to do. And inflict the most damage, get the biggest payout, because it's all about money. I mean, realistically, it's about money, and I always like to tell people, right, you may not think you're a target, but you're a target. Whatever you are, smallest nonprofit, biggest corporation, you're a target.
Yeah.
So
You've got
keep that in
data.
mind. Yep, exactly.
Awesome. Well, great conversation. Hopefully this
Yeah.
was helpful for everyone. Pinky, you got any shout outs?
Yeah, I mean, just really the whole team at FRSecure, honestly, has been great. Everybody's been tackling this from the VCSO side. Have been reaching out to their clients and talking to everybody. I know, on the IR team, we've been doing a lot of digging, and then on the red team, the penetration testing side of the house, we can always lean on those guys for, hey, what would you do here? What would you look for? Can you help us out with that kind of thing? And we do a lot of that. I mean, we're very collaborative here. Everybody kind of works together. So, big shout outs there. Like I said, pretty good shout out for Kyle there. He did a lot of good work over the weekend, so we'll give him some love.
Nice. Evan?
I'm going to give a shout out to Pinky's team, man.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize what it's like to be on a team like that. I had to give it up because it's a hell of a commitment. You get those calls at God knows all hours. You don't track your hours because it could be you just never know, right? It's a real stressful place to be in, and I think if people haven't lived it and walked it before, you don't know what it feels like. I have, Brad, you have, Pinky, obviously you have. There are days it's just a pain in the ass. I don't want to pick up the phone call. I don't want to respond. I want to go to bed. I want to spend time with my family. I want to do this. I want to do that. But you guys are, you're the ones who step into the fire and really do protect people. And I don't think people realize that as much as they should. So I want to give a shout out to you, man. I know it's a hard job, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, it's very true. I mean, I won't try to be too humble about that. It is true, and I know our guys all do it for the right reasons too, right? I mean, we always joke that we're trying to work ourselves out of a job, and I mean, it sounds like Kool-Aid, but I mean, we all drink it, and we're dead serious about it. We would rather talk to you when you're not in a bad situation, but we will be there to help if you need us. So
It's mentally draining too, very taxing.
Yeah.
It's like, the way I've described it to people that seems to resonate. You're trying to put together a puzzle, but you have no idea what it looks like. You don't know what the pieces are going to be, what the shape is. You've got stuff. So,
yep. And there are real people that are impacted by that puzzle not getting put together, right? I mean, so there are some very dangerous things that can happen. Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say my shout out was going to be to everyone on the team that worked through this, getting that communication out. and just that dedication. So keep it up.
Absolutely. Well, good episode, guys. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Pinky,
Yeah.
I hope we get to have you again because I love your laid back kind of way of talking about these things in a way that I think the non-technical people can also understand. So I appreciate you coming.
Hope so. Thank you. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
All right. That's a wrap.